They say that the forest has a memory, that every tree that has stood for 100 years has witnessed something. Every root that has drunk from the soil beneath your feet has tasted something that should not have been there. Tonight, we go in. 5 forests, 5 stories, every single one of them real. Not campfire tales, not folklore embellishments. These are forests where people walked in, normal people, people just like you, and either never came back or came back changed. If you are watching this alone, in the dark, good, stay with me. Aokigahara, the forest that wants you to stay. At the northwestern base of Mount Fuji, on the island of Honshu in Japan, there is a forest the Japanese call Jukai, the sea of trees. From above, from a helicopter, from a satellite image, it looks almost peaceful. A vast green carpet stretching across the ancient volcanic lava bed. Beautiful even, like a painting of a forest rather than a real one. But no birds live here. Let that sit with you for a moment. Birds, creatures with hollow bones and wild instincts, creatures that flee danger before we even sense it, refuse to nest inside Aokigahara. The forest is approximately 35 square kilometers. That's roughly 14 square miles of dense, impenetrable woodland growing directly on top of a layer of porous volcanic rock. Rock so rich in iron that compasses malfunction the moment you step inside. Your phone signal vanishes. Your GPS spins in circles. And the trees, they grow in wrong directions. Roots twist up out of the ground like grasping fingers. Trunks spiral. Branches grow downward. It is as if the land beneath this forest has never been entirely comfortable with what grows upon it. The ancient practice of ubasate, the abandonment of the sick, the elderly, the dying, is believed by historians to have taken place in these woods centuries ago. Families who could no longer feed their own would carry their weakest members deep into Aokigahara and leave them alone in the dark to die. Japanese mythology speaks of the Yūrei, the restless dead, spirits who died in states of extreme emotional suffering, in grief, in rage, in despair. The Yūrei cannot pass on. They are tethered to the place of their death by the weight of their unresolved pain. And Aokigahara, by any measure, holds more concentrated human suffering than perhaps any other piece of land on earth. Because the forest has another name. You already know it. Suicide Forest. Since the 1960s, Aokigahara has been associated with a tragic and deeply disturbing trend. Hundreds of people have walked into this forest with no intention of walking back out. The Japanese government stopped releasing official death counts after 2010. The numbers, they decided, were doing more harm than good. But investigators, researchers, and documentary filmmakers who have accessed the forest estimate that in some years, more than 100 bodies were recovered. In some years, many more were not. Now here is where the story changes. Because this is not just about tragedy. This is about something else that lives in this forest. In 2009, a team from the American Paranormal Investigation showed Destination Truth entered Aokigahara with thermal imaging equipment and night vision cameras. They were deep in the forest, several kilometers from the entrance, when one of their cameras, a forward-facing thermal imager, detected what appeared to be a human-shaped heat signature between the trees. But there was no one else on the expedition. The figure appeared, stood motionless for several seconds, and then moved. Not the way a living person moves, not with the weight and rhythm of footsteps. It drifted, slowly, between two trees, and was gone. The team later reviewed the footage. Multiple investigators confirmed the shape. They had no explanation. But that is almost expected. The stories from living survivors, from people who walked into that forest and chose to come out, those are the ones that stay with you. One man, a hiker who has asked to remain anonymous, described an experience from 2014. He had entered Aokigahara on a clear afternoon with a map and a flashlight, intending to stay on the marked trails and explore the famous ice caves near the forest's eastern edge. He had been inside for about 40 minutes when the temperature dropped. Not gradually, suddenly, like stepping into a freezer. And then he heard it. A woman crying. Not far ahead, not behind him, directly to his left, in the dense undergrowth where there was no path. A deep, raw, aching sobbing. The kind of crying that sounds like something breaking inside a person. He called out. The crying stopped. He waited. Silence. He began walking again, faster now, back toward the marked trail. That's when he realized. The plastic ribbon marking the path had vanished. He had not left the trail. He was certain of it. He had not stepped off the path once, but the path was gone. He walked for 47 minutes in what he believed was a straight line back toward the forest entrance. He did not reach it. His compass spun uselessly. His phone showed no signal, and its GPS simply displayed a blank gray screen. The satellite imagery, he later discovered, was corrupted for that zone. When he was finally found by forest rangers 2.5 hours later, he was sitting at the base of a tree, completely calm, with no memory of the previous hour. He had been sitting at the base of that tree for over 60 minutes. He does not know what happened to that hour. Local spiritualists in Japan believe that the Yūrei of Aokigahara do not just haunt the living, they call to them. They whisper at the frequencies where your rational mind cannot hear but your instincts can. They speak directly to the darkest corners of human emotion. The grief you've suppressed, the loneliness you don't discuss, the hopelessness you keep locked away. The forest does not take people by force. It invites them in, and it makes them want to stay. The Japanese government posts signs throughout Aokigahara's trails. They read, "Your life is a precious gift from your parents." They read, "Please consult the police before you decide to die." Those signs have been torn down again and again over the decades, and no one has ever seen who takes them. One last thing. In 2023, a retired geologist named Dr. Kenji Mori, who had spent 15 years studying the volcanic geology of the Fuji region, made an unauthorized entry into a restricted section of Aokigahara, known internally among forest rangers as Zone 5. He live-streamed his expedition. 20,000 people watched in real time. His stream ran for 41 minutes, and then it cut out. His camera was recovered 3 days later, found floating in a shallow stream near the forest's northern border. His last recorded audio, the final 20 seconds before the signal died, was a whisper. Low, calm, almost conversational. The words, translated from Japanese, "They are not ghosts, they are waiting. and they have been waiting for a very long time. Dr. Mori has not been seen since. HOIA-BACIU, the forest where time breaks. In the hills on the outskirts of Cluj-Napoca, in the heart of Transylvania, Romania, there is a forest so deeply associated with the paranormal that researchers from across Europe have been studying it for over 60 years. They haven't found answers. What they have found is far more disturbing. The forest is named after a shepherd. His name is lost to time, but the story persists. Sometime in the early 20th century, this shepherd walked into the forest with 200 sheep. He never came out. The sheep never came out. Not a single animal, not a single bone, not a trace. 200 sheep don't simply vanish. Not in a forest with no rivers deep enough to drown them, no ravines hidden enough to swallow them, no predators large enough to consume that many animals without a single trace. They simply stopped existing. Welcome to HOIA-BACIU, the Bermuda Triangle of Transylvania. Now, let me be clear about something. This forest has been studied by biologists, geologists, physicists, and paranormal investigators. The results of those studies are, in many cases, documented and verifiable. This is not folklore alone. This is a place where science runs out of language. Here are the documented facts. In August 1968, a military technician named Emil Barnea, on an off-duty trip with his wife and 2 colleagues, photographed an object above the forest. The photograph showed a disc-shaped metallic object hovering above the tree canopy. The photograph was analyzed by multiple independent photographic experts. None found evidence of tampering. The image was published in local newspapers. Emil Barnea lost his job. Romania was, at the time, a communist state under Nicolae Ceausescu, a government that did not tolerate paranormal claims. The photograph was suppressed. Barnea was discredited. But the photograph existed, and it was only the beginning. The paranormal phenomena of HOIA-BACIU do not follow a pattern. That is what makes this forest so unsettling. Haunted places usually have themes: a ghost that appears at a certain hour, a spirit tied to a specific spot. HOIA-BACIU doesn't work that way. In HOIA-BACIU, everything happens. Visitors report sudden, overwhelming nausea. Not the gradual nausea of motion sickness or illness, but a wave that crashes over them the instant they cross the tree line, as if something in the air changes at the forest's edge. Others report rashes appearing on their skin, burning, inexplicable rashes that vanish within hours of leaving the forest, headaches, migraines, a sensation of being watched from multiple directions simultaneously. Electronic equipment fails. Batteries drain completely within minutes. Cameras produce distorted images, faces appearing in photographs that were not visible to the naked eye at the time of the shot. Compasses, like in Aokigahara, become useless. But the worst phenomenon, the one that investigators return to again and again, is the disappearances. In the 1970s, a 5-year-old girl, her name has been kept private at her family's request, wandered into HOIA-BACIU during a family picnic at the forest's edge. The adults noticed her absence within minutes. A search party was organized immediately. Forest rangers were called. An extensive sweep of the area was conducted. She was not found. For 5 years, she was not found. And then, one afternoon, she walked out of the forest. She was wearing the same clothes she had been wearing the day she disappeared, 5 years earlier. The clothes were not deteriorated, not torn, not dirty in the way fabric becomes dirty over 5 years of use. She had not aged. She could not remember where she had been. Take a moment with that. Researchers have taken soil samples from the clearing, the perfectly circular, perfectly barren patch of earth in the center of the forest where nothing has ever grown. Lab analysis has found nothing anomalous. Normal soil composition, normal pH levels, no toxins, no radiation beyond background levels. No reason, no scientific reason whatsoever why nothing grows there. But nothing grows there. Nothing has grown there in living memory. Nothing has grown there, locals believe, since before anyone was alive to remember. A paranormal investigation team from Cluj-Napoca conducted a study in 2018. 8 researchers, armed with electromagnetic field detectors, thermal cameras, audio recording equipment, and motion sensors, entered the forest at midnight and set up a base camp at the edge of the barren clearing. Within 90 minutes, 4 of the 8 investigators reported identical symptoms simultaneously. A sudden, crushing sensation of extreme sadness. Not anxiety, not fear, but grief. Profound, bottomless grief. The kind of grief that follows a death. One investigator began to cry uncontrollably and could not explain why. One sat down in the dirt and refused to move. Their EMF detectors spiked simultaneously at 1:17 a.m., all 8 detectors, maximum reading, sustained for 11 seconds, then back to 0. The thermal camera captured something in the barren clearing. A shape, human, standing at the center of the circle. The shape was not warm. It registered on the thermal camera as colder than the surrounding air. Not just ambient temperature, but measurably, significantly colder, as if whatever stood in that circle was actively drawing heat from the environment. The investigation team left the forest at 3 a.m. When they reviewed their GPS data, each investigator had been carrying a personal GPS tracker. They discovered something that has never been satisfactorily explained. 3 of the 8 investigators had, according to their GPS records, been in a location that does not exist. The coordinates their trackers recorded during the period of the EMF spike placed them approximately 800 meters outside the boundary of HOIA-BACIU forest. They had not left the forest. They had been standing with their colleagues at the edge of the clearing. Every other investigator confirmed this, but 3 GPS units said otherwise. 3 units said they had been somewhere else entirely. A woman who grew up in a village near the forest told a Romanian journalist in 2021 that her grandmother had a saying passed down through generations: HOIA-BACIU nu uită nimic. HOIA-BACIU forgets nothing. The Black Forest, where the Grimm tales were born in blood. The Romans called it Silva Nigra, the Black Wood. They named it that because the tree canopy was so thick, so impenetrably dense, that the forest floor existed in a state of near-permanent twilight. Sunlight didn't enter the Black Forest. It couldn't. The Romans, a civilization that conquered most of the known world, refused to enter this forest. Their historians wrote that the interior was a darkness unlike any other, and advised their armies to stay on the roads and keep the tree line in sight. They had heard what happened to people who went in. The Schwarzwald, Germany's Black Forest, stretches over 6,000 square kilometers in the southwest of the country, running along the Rhine Valley toward the borders of France and Switzerland. It is the largest forested mountain range in Germany, and it is, historically, one of the most deeply haunted places in Europe. Not haunted in a theatrical sense, not haunted the way a derelict house is haunted, haunted the way a battlefield is haunted. The Black Forest has served as the backdrop for witch trials, for pagan ritual, for public execution, for wartime atrocity, and for centuries of suffering so deeply embedded in the landscape that the trees themselves seem to carry the memory of it. The brothers Grimm, Jacob and Wilhelm, the German academics who compiled the now famous fairy tales in the early 19th century, collected their stories directly from the communities that lived at the Black Forest's edges. They did not invent those stories. They transcribed them. Think about that when you remember what happens in those stories. Hansel and Gretel, two children abandoned in a dark forest by parents who could no longer feed them, lured toward a house of deception, imprisoned and nearly eaten. Little Red Riding Hood, a child who encounters something in the forest that wears the face of something familiar, but is not what it appears to be. Sleeping Beauty, a curse placed on an innocent by a power that should not exist. These stories were not invented as children's entertainment. They were warnings. They were the accumulated wisdom of generations of people who had lost someone or something to the Black Forest, presented as fairy tales so that children would listen, so that children would remember. In the village of Schonach im Schwarzwald, there is a figure that locals refer to only as der Wächter, the Watcher. Reports of the Watcher span at least 200 years of documented history. The description never changes significantly across generations, across different families, across different parts of the village. A tall figure, very pale, very still, standing in the trees at the forest's edge, just far enough inside the tree line to be in shadow, watching. It is always described the same way. Not moving toward you, not moving away from you, not gesturing or signaling in any way, just watching. And when witnesses report making eye contact with it, that moment of direct, undeniable visual contact, they uniformly describe the same sensation. Time stopping, a complete suspension of movement, as if the moment of eye contact creates a pause in the world, a held breath, a gap in the fabric of ordinary experience. And then the figure is gone, vanished between one blink and the next. Those who have refused to look away, those who have held the eye contact, report that it gets worse. After the Watcher disappears, they begin experiencing a sense of being followed. Not immediately, but gradually over the following hours. The feeling of a presence just behind them, just outside their peripheral vision. They turn. Nothing. They go inside. The feeling follows. They sleep. They dream of the forest. One man, a forester named Klaus, who worked the Black Forest trails for 23 years and has spoken to German paranormal researchers, described encountering the Watcher on 3 separate occasions over a 15-year period. The third encounter was different. He made eye contact, and this time, instead of disappearing, the Watcher smiled. Klaus walked off that trail and didn't work in the forest for 6 months. He has never been able to explain the smile, not what it looked like, not whether it was a human smile or something that approximated one. He says only this: it was the most frightening thing he has ever seen. Not because it was aggressive, not because it was threatening, because it looked like it recognized him. The witch trials of the Black Forest region were among the most sustained and violent in European history. Between the 15th and 17th centuries, the communities of the Schwarzwald conducted hundreds of executions, burnings, hangings, drownings, of people accused of consorting with forest spirits, of practicing the old magic of the trees, of keeping the ancient pagan faith that predated Christianity by thousands of years. The sites of those executions were never consecrated, never blessed, never officially mourned, and they remain, to this day, unmarked. But locals know where they are. They know because the animals avoid those patches of earth, because the trees that grow there grow wrong, because on certain nights, when the wind is right and the forest is still, people walking near those sites report the smell of burning. Not wood burning, not leaves burning, flesh burning, and one final account from the Black Forest. Recent, documented. In 2022, a group of 4 university students from Freiburg, 3 women and 1 man, entered the Black Forest on a camping trip. They were experienced hikers. They had proper equipment. They filed a route plan with the local forestry authority. On the second night, their campfire went out. Not gradually, not as it burned down. It simply went out. Mid-burn, as if something extinguished it from above. The temperature, they reported, dropped sharply. And then they heard footsteps around the perimeter of their camp. Not the footsteps of a single person, the footsteps of many people, moving in a slow circle around their tents, the crunch of old leaves and dry branches. They stayed absolutely still inside their tents for over an hour. The footsteps circled them without stopping. When dawn came, the footsteps stopped. They packed immediately and left. When they reviewed the footage from a trail camera they had set up facing the camp, standard equipment, motion activated, they found that the camera had captured 23 minutes of footage from that night. In that footage, the camp, in the dark, the fire burning normally, and around the perimeter, shapes, pale, human-shaped, moving slowly, continuously around the tents. Not walking, exactly. Gliding. Just above the forest floor. Dozens of them. A continuous circuit of pale, silent shapes, moving around the 4 tents where 4 young people lay frozen with terror inside. The footage has been reviewed by 2 independent video authentication experts. Neither found evidence that it was fabricated. Neither expert would comment on what they believed the shapes were. Epping Forest, the forest where London buries its secrets. 12 miles from the centre of London, squeezed between the sprawling eastern suburbs of the city and the county of Essex, there is an ancient forest that has stood for over 2,000 years. Almost 6,000 acres of old-growth woodland, ponds dark enough to absorb light, bogs that have swallowed entire objects and people alike, trees that have not been pruned or shaped by human hands in centuries, allowed to grow wild and grotesque, massive twisted trunks that look like melted figures, branches that grew downward before reversing course, roots that surface and resurface in long, grasping arcs. Epping Forest. And unlike many of the haunted forests of the world, distant, isolated, requiring a journey to reach, this one is accessible by public transit. You can take the Central Line from Liverpool Street and be at the forest's edge in 30 minutes. Which is perhaps why it has so many stories. Epping Forest has been many things over 2,000 years. It was a hunting ground for English monarchs. Henry VIII, Elizabeth I, and Charles II all rode through these trees. It was a sanctuary for highwaymen, bandits, and outlaws. It was a hiding place for criminals fleeing London justice. And it was, and this is documented, thoroughly and disturbingly, a disposal site. The London gangsters known as the Kray Twins, who controlled the criminal underworld of East London throughout the 1950s and 60s, used Epping Forest to bury bodies. The forest's proximity to their operational area, its size and its dark, inaccessible interior, made it ideal for concealing evidence. Several of their victims are believed to be buried here still, their precise locations unknown, their deaths officially unsolved. But the Krays were not the first to use this forest as a graveyard. Dick Turpin, the notorious highwayman who terrorized the roads of Essex and Hertfordshire in the 1720s and 30s, used Epping Forest as his operational base. He had a hideout somewhere in its interior. He conducted murders here. He buried people here. He was eventually captured, tried, and hanged in York in 1739. But his ghost, by all accounts, never left Epping. Reports of Turpin's apparition date to within a generation of his death, and they have not stopped. He appears most commonly near an area known as Trapp's Hill and the ancient earthworks of Loughton Camp, either riding on horseback, moving fast through the trees along an invisible road, or standing still, watching. In 2003, the television program Most Haunted filmed a live investigation at Epping Forest, specifically searching for evidence of Turpin's spirit. The investigators reported that something, they believed it to be Turpin, actively led them off their planned route deeper into the forest, into areas they had not intended to visit. They became disoriented and took over an hour to find their way back to their vehicles. But Turpin is not the most disturbing presence associated with this forest. There is a pond. It has no official name on modern maps. Locals have called it for generations the Lover's Pond. This name is not romantic. It commemorates a tragedy from the early 1700s. A young woman named Kate, a servant at a nearby estate, fell in love with her employer, a man of considerable status who could never publicly acknowledge her. When she became pregnant and he refused to take responsibility, she took her infant daughter to this pond and drowned herself and the child. The ghost of Kate has been reported at and near this pond continuously for over 300 years. Not seen. Not exactly. Felt. Visitors to the area near the pond report a sudden, overwhelming sensation of heartbreak. Not their own heartbreak, a foreign heartbreak, introduced from outside. The grief of someone else pressing in through the skin like cold water. Women especially report this sensation. Some have described it as debilitating. Having to sit down, unable to walk, unable to speak, as Kate's grief moves through them. And then, as they stand or sit in this state of borrowed despair, they sometimes hear, clearly and unmistakably, the sound of a baby crying. Beneath the water, there is also Hangman's Hill. At the junction of Avi Lane and Penist Green Lane, where the forest presses up against an unmarked road, there is a hill with a particular property that dozens of witnesses have experienced, and that physics cannot satisfactorily explain. If you park a car at the bottom of Hangman's Hill, in neutral, with the engine off, the car will roll uphill, toward the tree at the top of the hill. The tree from which, by local legend, many people were hanged over centuries of informal justice in this forest. The explanation is usually given as an optical illusion. The hill appears to slope upward when it actually slopes down, causing the observer to perceive uphill motion from a car that is actually rolling down. But the road has been surveyed, its gradient has been measured, and it does slope upward. The cars roll uphill. In 2019, a woman walking alone in Epping Forest in the early morning, before sunrise, something she had done regularly for years, reported an encounter near the area of the ancient earthworks known as Ambresbury Banks, believed to have been built by Celtic tribes and associated by historians with the warrior Queen Boudica. She heard drumming, Not distant drumming. Immediate, clear, rhythmic drumming. The kind that carries a beat you feel in your chest. And beneath the drumming, marching. The sound of many feet moving in unison, on dry ground, in leather and metal. She stood still and listened. And then she saw them. Figures, moving through the trees in a line. Not transparent, not glowing, not the stereotypical translucent blue-white of horror film ghosts. Solid looking, wearing what appeared to be ancient clothing and carrying objects she described as spears or staves. Moving past her at a distance of perhaps 20 meters, completely unaware of her presence, as if she was watching something that existed in a different layer of time. She counted at least 30 figures. They moved through the trees in a straight line and disappeared into the darkness ahead. The drumming faded. She stood in the silent forest until sunrise, before she could bring herself to move. She has never walked in Epping Forest again. The Pine Barrens, the Devil's Forest. There is a forest hiding in plain sight, between New York City and Philadelphia, in the middle of one of the most densely populated corridors of land in the United States. There are 1 million acres of wilderness that most Americans don't know exist. 1 million acres. The Pine Barrens of New Jersey. From the air, they look wrong. The trees are too short, too pale, too sparse for a forest their age. They grow in sand, not soil, but actual sand, the remnant of an ancient seabed that once covered this part of the continent. The water that runs through the Pine Barrens is the color of tea, stained dark by iron and organic matter, and the rivers have no fish for miles at a stretch. Nothing here is quite right. European settlers first arrived at the edge of the Pine Barrens in the 17th century. They found a landscape almost completely inhospitable to farming. The sandy soil wouldn't hold crops. The acidic water wasn't suitable for most livestock. The dense interior offered no navigable roads. Settlements clustered at the edges of the barrens. Some brave or desperate colonists built communities inside. Those communities are gone now, not moved, not absorbed into neighboring towns. Gone. The Pine Barrens are filled with what locals call the ghost towns of New Jersey. Abandoned settlements whose last residents simply vanished from historical record. Foundations, chimneys, cemeteries where the names on the headstones match no family histories anyone can trace. People walked in, built lives, and then stopped being recorded in history. But you didn't come to this story for ghost towns. You came for what lives in those ghost towns. In 1735, a woman named Jane Leeds, called Mother Leeds by her neighbors, a woman of some local reputation for herbal medicine and folk practice, is recorded in colonial-era accounts as having given birth to her 13th child. The Pine Barrens are full of what was left behind. Local accounts, documented in journals, in letters, in parish records, describe her crying out during the labor that she wished the child would be the devil's own. So weary was she of poverty and childbearing and hardship. The child that was born, according to multiple accounts written in the days and weeks following the birth, was not human. It was described consistently across multiple independent sources as having the head of a horse or goat, bat-like wings, hooved feet, a forked tail, and eyes that glowed in the darkness. It was said to have screamed once, killed the midwife present at the birth, and flown up the chimney and out into the night. The Jersey Devil. More than 300 years of consistent documented reports. Not folklore handed down in the abstract, specific reports from specific people on specific dates. A creature approximately 4 feet tall, bipedal, with wings spanning roughly 12 feet, that moves at extraordinary speed through the pine trees and leaves tracks in the sand that no naturalist has ever definitively attributed to a known animal. In January 1909, in what remains the most extensively documented encounter in the creature's history, the Jersey Devil was reportedly sighted by over 1,000 people across Delaware Valley over the course of a single week. The reports came from police officers, postmasters, teachers, a former mayor, and a commodore of the United States Navy. Newspapers across the region covered the sightings. The Philadelphia Zoo offered a reward for its capture. The creature was not captured. The sightings stopped and resumed periodically for the next century.